as our central president. Mina was a philosopher, a professor of philosophy. She lived with her brother, who was the Cardinal of Bologna. Both were intellectuals, and he was very effective in fighting the communists who lived in Bologna. Bologna was a communist stronghold, and he certainly did uphold the faith. She was not his housekeeper. There was another sister who kept house for them, but she did live with him until he died, and she stopped teaching when she became our central president. It wasn't possible to do both things. When the cardinal died, she moved back to her hometown of Pavia, and she lived there until she herself died. As the president of the Italian zone, she had had a mastectomy, and this came back many years later after she was our general president, and she did suffer very, very, very much. She she was able to be and to act as our president during the entire time of her 10-year mandate, but and she herself was succeeded by our present president, Agustina Marchetti Dori. She was a very humble person. In accepting the office the first time, she said, "You all know my faults. You know the things I can do and the things I can't do, but I will do my very best with the help of God." She loved the missionaries. She was an intellectual. At times, she spoke and thought at many degrees above most of us, and it was a little difficult for her to bring her thoughts down to a level where we could really understand them, but she did. One of her great attributes, I think, and virtues, was her ability to talk individually with any missionary who wanted to see her. And she was genuinely interested in the missionary, in her problems, in the things she was trying to do. And you always felt, after you had talked with Mina, that you had had a fair hearing, and she really understood what was going on in your life. A word about study courses. There has always been a study course as far as the Americans are concerned, because they were instituted as part of the formation of the missionaries, particularly the professed missionaries, very early in the days of the Institute, before we knew, before we knew anything about it. We took the 2 days prior to the beginning of the retreat and sat down and really studied diligently the material that had been sent over. Of course, it came over in Italian. We had to translate it. We weren't so good even at translating in those days. And we really had to learn by doing as far as Americanizing it was concerned. But we did study. And then we all had to write what we called a thesis, a paper on some part of that study course, to prove that we had really assimilated it. This whole idea was Father Gemelli's. He believed that we had to be in the front line and be, in that sense, be missionaries. But we could not be unless we were well-informed missionaries. We used to take the 2 days prior to the beginning of the retreat. This was at the time when all the missionaries, and we were very few in those days, made the same retreat, and we studied. One time, we were studying the Incarnate Word. We were sitting out under a tree, and it was very, very hot. Father Stephen was going into a lot of detail, and as some of us know, his voice was very soft, and it had the effect of relaxing you totally and completely and putting you to sleep. It did just that to me, and I fell off the chair and broke a rib. That was my first and only broken bone. One year we did not have a study course, and we thought the Lord was smiling very benignly on us. Well, it turned out that the study course had been sent over on the ship, the Andrea Doria, the Andrea Doria, and that ship sank. So someplace down at the bottom of the sea, we still have an unused study course. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Central Council and the General Assemblies. In 1959, we went to Europe, to Italy, to make our retreat. 14 of the 15 missionaries at that time went over, and we made our retreat at Livorno. It was a very great occasion. We were the first non-Italians to do anything like this, and I'll never forget receiving a letter from Orsolina Montevecchi telling me some of the things that we should do when we got over there and some of the things we should not do. One of the things that we were not to do was we could not wear what she called pantalones. And every time I see a group of missionaries and they're all in slacks, I think of this. But we were told we could not wear them. And so we did not. We were in skirts all the time. There was a bit of time between the end of our retreat and the opening of the General Assembly. Father Stephen and I were invited to that assembly, and so he and I did some sightseeing, particularly in France, during the week or so between the two events. We were really the first non-Italians to come to a General Assembly, and I've always said it was like being Exhibit A under glass, and they didn't quite know what to do with us. Everything was in Italian, and I couldn't understand a thing. Father Stephen could understand some, but they did not like his telling me and whispering to me, because he said it interfered with their understanding of what was going on. It was at this assembly that Maria Stico went out of office. She had served one term and would have been elected to a second term if Pope Pius XII had not told her that she was the one remaining Christian author in Italy, and anybody could be a president, but she should spend her remaining years and her energy in Christian writing. So she told us that she was not eligible. I think she was really glad that the Holy Father said this, because she did not want to be a president. She said that it was very upsetting to her when she had to think about an applicant and help to decide whether this person really had a vocation or not. She said, if I was going to vote on whether or not a person could be a member of a club, I could do that, but I do not feel that I have the right to say God has given her a vocation or God has not given her a vocation. So she was really glad when her term was over. Alda Micheli was elected to succeed her. Now, as far as I was concerned, I did not know who Alda Micheli was, but she had been the president of the Feminine Youth and became our president then at that General Assembly. I remember sitting next to Alda at the Holy Hour, which preceded the election, but I didn't know it was Alda. I knew that it was a missionary who was really very close to God, because as she knelt there praying, I just had the feeling that she and God were having quite an earnest and an animated conversation. When she was elected, I will always remember Maria Stika taking her by the arm and taking her down to Father Gemelli's quarters, where he gave her his blessing. This was just before he was still alive, but he died in that very same year. And Alda then became our president and served for 22 years, simply because we had a number of revisions of the Constitution during these years. And every time there was a revision and the people went out of office, it was as if they were starting over. So they had new terms all the time instead of the second terms, the second mandates. One of, I believe, I'm not too sure, but I think it was the election or the assembly following that election, 5 years hence, that we were in Laverna, and sitting next to me at that General Assembly was one of the very early missionaries from England. It was quite an animated assembly. You can imagine when almost all of us were Italian and there were just a few non-Italians there. It was very animated and sometimes rather heated. And I recall the English missionary looking over and leaning over to me and saying very quietly, "They must be so disappointed in us," because we were just really sitting there. It was hard to keep up with the conversation because they spoke so quickly. At that election, or at that assembly, the priest from Canada who was serving in Japan and was the priest who began the institute in Japan, Father John Baptist, was also at the assembly. He didn't understand very much Italian either, and he knew one phrase which he used all the time. One day, Maria Stico was talking with him, and he kept on saying, "Que peccato, que peccato." Well, that means, what a shame. And it was certainly not the response that you said to Maria Stico, and not the response that was the proper one in the stories that she was telling him. But at that very same assembly, after Alda Micheli was elected, and we were about to elect the council members, she stood up and said that she believed we should concentrate very much on becoming an international institute. She felt that this was the time for it. And so she hoped that the delegates to the assembly would elect at least one non-Italian to the council. Well, when the votes were all counted, all the people who were elected were Italian missionaries. So again, Alda stood up and she said in a very firm way that she was very disappointed because she felt we were not taking the right step, and so she was going to appoint a missionary who would serve on the council with the right to speak but not the right to vote. And I lost the rest of the sentence totally and completely, and it wasn't until this Father John Baptist said to me, "Barbara, stand up." And I said, "What for?" He said, "You've just been made a member of the Central Council." And so I stood up, and at that point everybody clapped. And that was the beginning of my entrance into the Central Council arena. I was taking Italian from Berlitz, and I was really very proud of what I could say and what I could understand. So when it came time to go over to Italy for the first Central Council meeting, I was feeling pretty good about my linguistic abilities. And I went first to England to visit the English missionaries, and then flew into the really the city airport, not into Fiumicino in Rome, and I took a cab from there to the office. The office had, at that time, in '64, had just moved from Milan to Rome. It was thought that that Rome was fast becoming the center of the Catholic world, far more so than Milan, and we would do far better to have a headquarters there. So this was the very first meeting. I was really pleased with myself as the taxi driver, and I conversed, and very interested when he invited me out to dinner. But I said no, and however, when I got to the headquarters, I began recounting my little story, and that I laughed afterwards because that was the one and only time that I was not met at the airport or wherever I came in and brought by a missionary to the office. I felt that maybe they didn't quite trust me to show up at just the right moment. The However, that was also the meeting at which I was trying to say something in Italian, and one of the members of the Central Council turned to another one and said, "What language is she speaking?" My accent was terrible, and I could never do the right thing with my R's, but I could always understand what they were saying. And this in itself was a very positive thing. Shortly after that, Elizabeth Peter appeared on the scene, and because of her great language abilities, and she certainly was a great linguist, she was given to me as an interpreter. I appreciated all that she did for me. It did mean that I didn't have to exert the effort to speak, and so I never did learn to speak the language as I might have if I had been responsible for taking part on my own in the Central Council meetings. The Italians did have a strange idea of the Americans, and I can remember hearing one of the missionaries saying, "Well, you know, she's really all right. She doesn't wear a lot of jewelry. She doesn't wear such funny clothes. I really think she's an all right missionary." And I just went on as if I didn't understand what they were saying, but I knew they were talking about me. This was not malicious. They were just trying to get all things straightened out. Every missionary was more than cordial, very courteous, very solicitous, and of course I didn't know much about Rome at that time. I'd been there twice before, I think, and always with a group and somebody who could take you sightseeing and doing things like that. So when I would come a day or so early, or maybe stay a day or so after the meeting, I would found that I was on my own. Everybody else went back to doing what they were doing. Just about everybody at that time was working for a Catholic organization. I can recall coming back and saying to Father Stephen that I would like to meet a missionary who worked for Alitalia, because everybody was working for a Catholic organization. One of the times when I was there, I met with some of the Roman missionaries, and they asked a lot of questions about our life in the United States. You see, it was soon enough after the war that they had not traveled, and so all they knew about the United States was what they saw in the movies, and that was not always such a positive thing. They asked me, you know, did we each have a car? Was it true that we had televisions in our houses? And I really didn't like all those questions after a while, so I asked them if I could ask a question, and of course they said yes. And I said, "Do you folks always drink wine with your meals?" And well, yes, that was just a custom. And I said, "Well, you see, we don't do that." And then they remarked about the fact that we had carpet on our floors, and I said, "Yes, but you have marble on yours, and we don't have that much marble in the United States." So we had a nice give and take, and I learned a lot from the Italian missionaries, things that I don't think I will ever forget. I made some very good friends with the Italian missionaries during these days. I tried to go to at least 2 to 3 times a year to the Central Council meetings, and one of the things that I appreciated very, very much was the opportunity to visit with Alma Micheli while she was our president. She lived not too far from the office. She had a beautiful apartment which she shared with another missionary. And She also had a missionary who was her cook and housekeeper, and a tremendous cook. One, at the end of every Central Council meeting, Alda would invite us all over there to her house for supper. And my goodness, the food was really so tasty. The china so beautiful. I felt almost like I was living in another world. They, of course, had never heard of plastic and paper plates and things like that. And so it was really stepping into a fairy tale world. But Alda herself was so down to earth. And every time you sat down with her to talk about the Institute, you learned something very important. As I said before, all the Italians went back to work the day after our Central Council meeting was over, and I had to find something to do with myself. So I learned how to get around Rome on the buses and the streetcars. It was really very simple, as long as you knew where you wanted to go, because at every bus stop, certainly at the beginning and the end of the line, there was a list of all the places where that bus or that streetcar went. And so you just had to learn when to get off and which end of the streetcar to get on, and then sort of worm your way up to the part where you could get off quickly, because they didn't stop very easily or for very long. But it was a lot of fun finding my way around Rome and learning where I could go and where I couldn't go. And one day I had the great opportunity to tell one of the Italian missionaries what buses to take to get where she wanted to go. And gee, was she surprised that this dumb American knew exactly what to do. During one of the terms that Alda Micheli had as our president, Carmela Rossi was her vice president, her first vice president. At that point, I was the second vice president. And Carmela had been head of the Women's Catholic Action when Alda was the head of Feminine Youth. She was also a collaborator of Armida Borelli and knew her, of course, very well. When Carmela was a Roman, and she lived there during the time of Mussolini. It's very interesting. She was a missionary, of course, at that time, but she held this other Catholic position. However, she was never able to make a retreat with the missionaries during the time that Mussolini was in power, because she really couldn't show that she had Catholic friends. So when it came time for her to renew each year, she had to do that within the confessional. She had a very lovely apartment and one of the biggest police dogs I have ever seen. He was very gentle, but one time, two very interesting incidences, I think, in regarding Carmela and myself. We did become good friends. She has since then gone home to God. And the first time she invited me to Pranzo, which of course was in the middle of the day, I arrived just about on time, and she said to me, now I know from watching television and what I've read that all of you Americans drink a glass of whiskey before you have dinner, so I have a glass of whiskey for you. Well, I had never had a glass of straight whiskey in my life, but I really didn't want to tell her that. So I managed to down the glass of whiskey. However, I was totally unprepared for the fact that with every course there would be a different wine. So as I managed to make it out the door and get the bus to go back to where I was staying, I thought, well, I guess I couldn't have gotten drunk and felt a little bit tipsy in any better a place. The second occurred after the meetings in 1970, when we had been to the Holy Land, and I had just come back and was staying in Rome for a while. One of the things that I really wanted to do when I was in Jerusalem was to go out to dinner. I wanted to see what their restaurants were like. Well, I went, and I wish I had not, although it was a great experience. But never have I had such a case of the, whatever you want to call it, the Pilgrim's Delight or whatever, as I had when I got back to Rome. And Carmela had asked me to come to lunch, to dinner with her, which again I say is at noon. And the day that I went, nobody knew I had been sick, but the day I went, I thought, I don't know whether I can eat anything or not. Well, when I got there, we didn't have any whiskey, thank goodness, but what she had prepared for us was a chicken breast in jelly. And it certainly did look good, but I knew I really couldn't eat it. Well, this famous police dog of hers had no problems like mine, and so he jumped up and with one leap managed to take the chicken breast off my plate, and off he went with the chicken breast. Now it just so happened that she didn't have any extras, so I was relieved that I didn't have to try to eat a full meal. I could just play around with the other things that were there. And she never did know how grateful I was to this dog, because he did help me out. One of my visits to Rome, I had gone down to St. Peter's to go to Mass, and as usual, I always went to the little chapel of Pius X. And I went up to receive and took my purse with me. But when I came back, I sat down and put the purse between my feet, and I prayed. Well, when I looked up and opened my eyes, there was no purse. So I immediately let out a cry, and I said, "Who took my purse?" Well, several of the people who were there at Mass said, "Oh, we saw a lady in a red dress come along and pick up your purse," but they hadn't done anything about it. So I went out to one of the Vatican guards, and I was really angry. And I told him what had happened, and he just looked at me and said in his broken English, "Lady, do you think everybody who comes to the Vatican comes to pray?" Well, I thought to myself, I wonder how he spells the word pray, but I didn't ask him. However, he did a very kind thing for me that I would not have known to do without his help, and that was he took me to the Vatican police station. I would never have gotten into the Vatican police station either if I hadn't lost my purse. And there I filed a complaint and described the purse and so on, but he told me that the chances of my ever getting it back were sort of nil. Well, when the missionaries found out that I had lost my purse and really all my worldly belongings, at least those I had with me, everybody gave me some lira, and I had more money than I had when the purse was stolen. However, I didn't have a passport, and I didn't have any identification cards, and I didn't even have a rosary. Well, one of the first things I did was go down to the American Embassy. Here again, I would never have seen the inside of the embassy, except for this episode. And I had to get a temporary passport so I could get back into the United States. Well, I had to have my picture taken and all that, and that took a few days. However, one of the days, I had a phone call from Elizabeth Peter, and she said, "Barbara, did you have my phone number in your purse?" And I said, "Well, probably I did, because I don't remember it." And she said, "Well, somebody called me. They are leading I think it was Norwegian or Finnish, one of those Scandinavian countries anyway, a tour, and one of their people found your purse behind a bush in one of the gardens. And if you go down to such and such a hotel, you can pick up your purse." So down I went to the hotel, and I did get the purse. Inside, the passport had been torn to bits. The money was all gone, but the rosary was still there. And so I still had to remember how much money I owed everybody, and of course I couldn't pay it back until the next time I came to Rome, and then I had enough lira that I could repay all the people who had given me their money. The Institute gave me many opportunities to travel, and for this I'm grateful, because I did come to see the Institute on an international level and to realize that the United States is just one small fraction of the entire Institute. The first place
I visited was Canada. And I went there at the request of the president, along with Father Stephen, to conduct a visitation. I had never done anything like this before, and it was hard really to know how to begin and where to begin, and very difficult to interview and talk